the fact that the money itself is rooted in a lie, right? That debt is money, really, right? That we can create money out of thin air, which I guess mechanistically how this works. The U.S. Treasury borrows from the Fed, right? So they're issuing new debt and borrowing dollars from the Fed.
Right.
Interest is paid to the Fed for creating this money out of thin air, which is a complete illusion, as we've touched on.
Yeah.
So that is a lie, right? That is fundamental. Like, money does not equal debt, right? If anything, one good definition of money is the final extinguisher of debt.
Correct.
So to have a debt-based money is an oxymoron in terms. So you're starting out with a lie, just at the basic technological level of money.
Right.
How does that then become lies at all these other levels, right? You're saying Krugman's incentivized to tell this lie. The CPI calculation is now a lie, and you mentioned shadow stats, right?
Yeah.
The calculation used to be done this way in the 80s, and if we did that calculation this way, reported inflation would be 20%.
Correct.
But every time it starts to creep up, they change the way they calculate it, right? And this is especially crazy. Sorry, just to emphasize this point. The CPI, right? The metric that is supposed to tell us what prices are varying, right? The variation in price levels.
Yeah.
Every time there's a variation in a particular good, they exclude the thing that's volatile, right? And I forget what the
food and energy.
they say it's too volatile to include in CPI. But CPI is the metric we're using to measure the volatility of prices. So again, an oxymoron, right?
And by the way, everyone needs food and energy. They're the base layer. Without food, we starve. Without energy, we can't do anything.
We can't move.
Yeah, right. So, look, I mean, don't get me started on just, the evil nature of our government. I mean, I think our kids will, say, what the fuck were you guys thinking? Letting 15 people on the Federal Reserve Board set the price of the most important thing in the world, which is money.
Yes.
I mean, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, I was a kid in the 70s, and, there was the Politburo ran the USSR, and, there were a lot of stories in that time. They had grain problems. They'd either have way too much grain or they'd have way too little grain. It was because the Politburo was setting grain prices.
Right.
There was no, prices should be set by supply and demand.
Yes.
The interest rate is the price of money. It's the cost of a person who saves money and has excess capital and says, you know what, I don't need this right now. I'll lend it to you to do something useful with. And the person who wants to borrow it says, okay, that cost of capital is low enough and I know I can earn a return in excess of that cost.
Right.
And therefore I'll pay you your 3% or your 5% or whatever the number is interest. That is the most important base layer price in the world, bar none. Yeah. It determines what gets done and what doesn't get done. And so we're going to let 15 people on the Federal Reserve Board set the price of that? It's fucking nuts.
Yeah.
It'd be like saying we're going to let 15 people on this Federal Reserve Board determine the length of a yardstick.
Exactly.
And then, okay, Mr. Construction Guy, Mr. Builder, go out and try and build that house. And by the way, the yardstick's going to be changing all the time.
Yes.
But build it to spec.
Right. Yeah.
You can't do it.
Right.
You gotta have a system, a fair system, whereby supply and demand match one another.
Yes.
And the Keynesians have destroyed that. We don't have that.
That's a wonderful analogy, right? The idea of fixed standards.
Correct.
Right. We have a fixed standard for the inch, the foot, the meter, et cetera.
Right.
And upon those fixed standards, the machinery of global commerce is built.
Right.
If those standards fluctuated, you would have no ability to plan for the future.
Yeah. What if my gallon was different than your gallon was different than the next guy's gallon? And, it's close. I'm a little bit off. Well, fine. Close isn't good enough. I mean, there's a standard, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's close is not good enough unless you're playing horseshoes or hand grenades.
Or nuclear war. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But in engineering, right, we need precise, fixed standards that we can all communicate.
And so you got this fuzzy money standard.
Yeah.
What is money? I mean, that's the name of your show, right? Yeah. I mean, it is the defining standard of our age and the defining question of our age. I agree with you. And it's really what this fourth turning is all about.
Yeah.
We're in a fourth turning. Society is badly broken and getting worse. I mean, it's hard to say that because there are so many good things in this world and in the society and in the people that are in this world. And I think we're evolving to a higher consciousness. I think, I think we're going to avoid war. I think we're going to avoid nuclear destruction. I think a lot of great shit is going to happen. But I got to tell you, until we fix this money problem, and the reason I'm such a campaigner for fixing it is I don't want my kids to live in a shitty world.
Sure.
And I lived in a pretty good world. It wasn't perfect, but I grew up in the 70s. It was great.
Yeah.
You know, and compared to today, it was so much better. And a lot of people who are alive today don't remember that. They don't see it. They don't know what it was.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't the rancor. There was a flat middle class. The rich weren't as crazy rich as they are now.
Yeah.
You know, people were generally speaking honest. I mean, of course, there were exceptions, Nixon being a good example.
Of course.
You know, the wars were smaller.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the Vietnam War was obviously a horrible thing. But the point is that, you know, there was a time when this country was a much, much better country, particularly right post-World War II.
Yeah.
And we were talking before the show, it's never been a perfect country.
Sure.
But I think the founding documents are nearly perfect. If we could adhere to them, we'd be in good shape.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And so, yeah, it does come down to those words, right? It does seem like, again, when there's a lie built into the money, it's as if the money itself is evil, right? I mean, if we consider lying to be immoral, right? I mean, I guess you're pretty close to it being evil, but there are many good people in the world trying to do the right thing,
Absolutely.
right?
Most people.
Yeah.
Most people. I mean, in my view, you know, the government is like a litmus test for bad people. I mean, if you're in government, almost by definition, you're bad. I mean, I've said this many times. I would rather pick my senators out of the fucking phone book randomly than I'm serious. I'm not kidding you. I am sure they would do a better job than the people we elect.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, we could, you know, if we just took, you know, graduates from good colleges who had mid-level jobs and threw them all in a bucket and randomly picked one and said, you know what, you're president.
Yes.
We'd be better off than we are today.
For sure.
I mean, because it's like adverse selection.
Yes.
Because we're getting, you know, the evil people who like to control other people are rising to the top and are drawn to this because they can get illegitimate power. I mean, this is the story of Dick Cheney. I mean, the guy's just a fucking shit kicker.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, he gets into government and, you know, he becomes a vice president. He, you know, runs Halliburton. He starts wars. I mean, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I don't want evil people like that in positions of power in my country. I just don't.
That's such a great point that the most sociopathic
and
the most gifted with rhetorical flourish are drawn to these positions of power.
Oh, it's like bees to honey. I mean, you know, it's because they could never get any of it. They couldn't get it legitimately.
Exactly.
Right.
And those people are very rare, right? Like the Dick Cheneys of the world. There's not many sociopathic people that are gifted at that level. So literally picking people at random, you'd be much better
I'm sure
off.
we'd do better. I'm sure we would. Yeah.
And I think Plato would agree too, that he was saying that until philosophers become kings, right, that we're going to have these problems, that you needed the people that actually don't want to govern to govern.
Right. Yeah, to me, it's almost a litmus test. I mean, if you don't want the job, then I'm more likely to want you.
Yes.